Ignatius Press and the Augustine Institute present The Formed Book Club. Catholic book lovers unpacking good books, chapter by chapter. If you like us, please help us by subscribing and by reviewing us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you might listen. And don't forget to sign up for weekly updates and study questions at formedbookclub.ignatius.com.
Welcome back to the Formed Book Club with Vivian Dewdrow, Joseph Pierce, myself, Father Fessio. We think we're going to conclude our discussion today of saints and sinners in the Cristero War. And we are going to take up where we left off, namely going to the next chapter 8 on great Jesuit hero of mine, Miguel Pro. And photographs that shocked the world. I just want to make one little comment right away on page, where am I here? It's here somewhere. There it is, on page 192. We're finally, in third way down, finally word came that he and 13 others would be going to Los Gatos in Northern California.
Look what I wrote in my book.
Yeah, that was where I spent my novitiate.
Oh, wow.
In the same place he was, Los. But you know something? I don't recall anyone ever mentioning that at the time. I wish I would have known, just to know that I walked the same ground this guy did.
Right. Yeah.
Yep, I highlighted that too because I knew that's where Father...
And again, as a Jesuit, I mean, the different orders with the different characteristics and so on, but one of the characteristics of the Jesuits has been sort of original type people. You know, you have Egyptologists and you've got anthropologists and you've got linguistic people and you've got all the kinds of things. And here was a man who was a musician and a jester and a dramatic type person. Really phenomenal person.
Well, there's a connection as well as we are recording this on December the 1st. Of course, today is the feast of St. Edmund Campion.
Yes.
Another great Jesuit martyr who was a playwright and I had an artistic side to him as well. So providential connection, perhaps.
Yes, and the author compares Pro to Campion on page 198. Spends a paragraph that similar when Pro returns to Mexico, knowing very well that the church is being persecuted fiercely and that priests are being murdered, that he returns anyway. And similarly, Campion returned to England in the 16th century only to be hanged, drawn, and quartered by order of Queen Elizabeth. So, yes, it is a nice coincidence. And you know, Miguel Pro's feast day was that last week?
November 23rd.
Yeah, so his feast day was just recently. So, yes, the stars are aligning, I think.
That's right.
Well, thanks, Vivian, for pointing that out, because I hadn't actually highlighted that. And I think, especially bearing in mind the day on which we're recording this, that connection is apropos. And
I think that they both went out in a very phenomenal way, but in different ways. I mean, Campion's brag is something I can't read without crying. Yeah. Miguel Pro is a Cristo Rey.
Yep.
That's glorious.
It is glorious. And we need these examples, don't we?
We do.
Someone should actually publish a print of Miguel Pro's photograph with Campion's words underneath.
There you go.
That's an idea, okay.
There you go. But so here are men with such strong convictions, and when it comes to, the right and the true and the good, they're not going to compromise, and they're even willing to die. And yet, at the same time, when you see on page 197, Pro's conversation with these communist miners or whatever they are, and he taking them where they're at in order to bring, that he's willing to have solidarity with people who, it's a great little conversation. He's joined this group of young miners on their train ride home, and he's still,
Belgium, I think, right?
Is this was in Belgium? Yes, and these striking coal miners, and Pro himself, as we find out from this, grew up in this mining area in Mexico. His father worked for the mining company. He knew very well the exploitation of these workers. working for American firms, by the way, American mining companies who, why do you think they went to Mexico? Because they don't have labor unions and they don't have labor laws. And so you go to a third world country and exploit their workers, right? And that's
and their resources.
And their resources, which is why Woodrow Wilson sent the Marines in, and whoever did at one point or another. So, it's the same old story over and over and over again. But I was so touched by this conversation. So he's on the train with these Belgian striking miners, and
still dressed like them.
However, it soon became clear that he was not welcome in their company, because I guess they find out he's a priest. And they go, "We're socialists," one of them said to him with a hostile look. "Excellent," the young priest said. "I'm a socialist also." "There are communists here too," the miner said a minute later. "Better still," the priest said, "for I am even a communist. For instance, it is 1 o'clock. You have some food, and I too am hungry. Won't you share your food with me?" And he completely won them over. So, this kind of, it reminds me of St. Paul saying, "Be all things to all men." Yeah. Now, obviously, you've got a Caius in power, and as I'm sure Joseph is going to be happy to point out, all the lies that he told to get a deal and then broke every one of them. You have to have the discernment to know, when is my being like you going to help win you over for Christ? And when actually I'm going to let you shoot me because there's no compromise with you.
At some point, you can't meet people where they are because they are not willing to be met.
Yes.
The one thing I would say, I'm playing the role I seem to have adopted for this particular book of Mr. Pedantic and Mr. Irritable. When he's 16 years old, going back to page 185, that the miners surround his family's home, and a riot broke out. With a crowd of mine workers surrounding his home, 1907. And my only complaint with this is talking about the soldiers who mow them down, galloping over them. True to their reputation, they galloped over the demonstrators, and I'm certainly absolutely not condoning that. But then he says, at the sight of innocent workers being killed like dogs. Now, they certainly do not deserve to be killed like dogs or like striking, rioting mine workers. You don't just gallop over people or kill them, but they're not innocent workers, right? They are rioting demonstrators outside Miguel Pro's father's home, and so it's that sort of loose talk by the author that irritates me.
Yes. Well, I guess I'm a little more indulgent.
You are, and it's probably you'll probably get to heaven before I will. So pray for me.
I'll lower down an onion for you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see. Where else?
By the way, many may not get that, but that's a Dostoevsky reference.
Yes, it is a Dostoevsky reference. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Brothers Karamazov. So, yes. Yes, this man, how can you not admire this man? And so when he does return to Mexico, this is July, on 198, this is July 126. And as we've discussed, Caius had just issued these restrictive laws. As bad as the church has already been persecuted up till now over the last several decades, it's just now going to get amped up even more. And then on 199, suspension of worship becomes effective July 31st. He continued this frenzy of activity underground, celebrating masses, distributed communion in secret locations, called communion stations to countless numbers of people. And one time, 1,200 people. So the man is willing, he's just going to keep serving the flock, just like those priests in recusant England did. He's going to keep serving the flock, even if that means it's going to eventually lead to his death.
Yes. And then maybe we can move now to how this was resolved.
Yeah.
Another priest was involved.
In
Chapter 9, Father John Burke, Paulist priest, and the tireless ambassador, who is, what's his name again?
The ambassador Meadows or something like that?
No, not Meadows.
Sorry.
I should know.
I know, we've all been reading this and underlining things. Morrow,
that's it. Right.
I knew it was an M.
Yeah.
one thing that struck me right away in this chapter is the fact that this Father Burke, who ends up playing this critical role in negotiating with Calles, that when the United States entered World War I in 1917, 212,
Okay.
he was editing a magazine, a Catholic magazine at the time, and he threw his support behind President Wilson. He sincerely believed in the war cause. Now, that might strike a lot of people as odd that an American priest would, I mean, as we know, World War I was just a horrible, horrible conflict that took so many lives and devastated Europe. But you realize that one of the things that brought it to the end was the American entry in 1917. That if the American Marines hadn't gone into the Blue Woods and all these places and finally turned the tide.
I wrote a book that's not been published. It's the first book I wrote after I became a Catholic, about a German called Otto Strasser, who was an anti-Nazi in Germany between the wars. But he was fought in World War I in the trenches. And he said that when they saw, because everyone was worn out, dejected, lice-ridden, etc., they basically punched themselves to a stalemate. And then they said, when they saw the Americans marching in, brand new uniforms, new weapons, lots of energy, they just knew it was over. I mean, it was the decisive blow. And that war, which had basically become entrenched and bogged down in a stalemate, which was going nowhere, needed to be brought to an end. And
That's
really,
right.
whichever side the United States came in on would have won.
That's right.
They were the decisive factor, no
That's
doubt
right.
about it.
That's right. So I think that gives a little bit of background as to why someone could be, like, it's not like they're warmongers. They're actually supportive of a cause that will end it, and it did. So, but that's...
That case is absolutely true, it did end the war. It actually saved lives, probably.
I would like to correct one small thing, which I was unaware for many, many, many years. It's the bottom of page 211, talking about Father Burke advocating for the millions of, next page, immigrants arriving in the U.S. shores, most of whom were Irish Catholics. Now, I'm an Italian American Catholic, but I was surprised to learn that by far the greatest percentage of immigrants from Europe in the late 19th and early 20th century were not from Italy and not from Ireland, they were from Germany. The largest number of immigrants from Europe to the United States is Germans. I was sort of shocked by that.
Right.
But of course, I never lived in Minneapolis or, those Midwest northern states where they all went to,
Right, but he's talking about Catholic immigrants. And during certain periods of time, as far as Catholic immigration is concerned, Irish were making up the bulk of, in certain time periods, those waves. And
I think the Irish were the biggest early wave, weren't they? After the Irish potato famine in 1845, that was definitely the first wave, and then you had the Italians and other European Catholic immigrants coming in towards the end.
But I have to defend my honor. He's not talking about Catholic. He says advocating for the millions of immigrants arriving in the U.S., most of whom were Irish Catholics. He's not saying he was advocating for the Catholic immigrants.
No, I know. I mean, you've heard. I'm not going to disagree with the facts.
You can.
No, I'm not disagreeing with facts. I'm just saying that from a Catholic perspective, sure seemed like he's not the most careful writer in the world, but
that's true too.
I mean, I would query whether by the turn of the 20th century, Irish Catholics were the predominant Catholic ethnic group coming to the country. I think that was certainly true of the mid-19th century after the potato famine. But I think by the end of the 19th century, there's all sorts of other immigrants coming down. I'd like to see a source for that, actually.
Right. Being
Mr. Irritable and pedantic again.
Well, and it could be that he's just being sloppy here, that he's taking something that's an assumption and treating it as though we're a fact, right?
We never do that.
No. Anyway, yeah. So yes, this is a very complex set of maneuverings that start taking place here when this priest enters the discussion. But the fact that, and however much we might be disappointed with the deal that they got, because no sooner did they get it than Calles broke his promises. As the great Lenin once said, promises are like pie crusts. They're meant to be broken. Okay, that's what you're up against, right? When you're up against
Lenin also said, one of my favorites of his, is that advance on all fronts. Wherever you encounter steel, withdraw. Wherever you encounter mush, advance. Which, if that's not what anti-communists need to learn, I don't know what is.
Exactly. So, but I still give this priest an awful lot of credit for all of this
absolutely
hard work in trying to broker some kind of deal to put an end to all of this persecution and violence in Mexico.
Now, do we praise him or blame him for this? That one of the things he did to help resolve this conflict was be the major motivation for the establishment of the National Catholic War Council, the NCWC, which after the war became the National Catholic Welfare Council, which later became the NCCB, the National Catholic Council of Bishops, and now is the USCCB. So basically, this man is at the origin of the USCCB, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. I think it's a good thing. It's not dogmatic. It's not meant to be. It's meant to be practical. It can help bishops, but at the same time, it can prevent or make it more difficult for bishops to exercise their own authority,
And that's because, human nature being what it is, when you get into a group, an institutional setting, there's a tendency to become psychological children and let the prevailing whatever it is decide things so that I don't have to, so that this is just classic. And
there's a cloak of anonymity behind it as well. It's the collective has made the decisions, so none of us are individually responsible. But be fair, this is not the fault of Father Burke. He can't be blamed for not knowing how things would develop.
That's right.
100 years later.
That's right. That's right. And he knew. I mean, at the time that this is taking place, the only national organized Catholic group is the Knights of Columbus, and he was able to use them so effectively to generate. Not that he was using them; they were already involved. But he saw what an organization can do to bring about political results, and so it only made sense that he would try to get the bishops to gather and speak with a unanimous voice as to put pressure on.
And the Knights of Columbus come through as very heroic in this whole saga, And exactly that, it's a lay organization. And so this priest wants to encourage the bishops to have the same kind of organizational unity to help stop this thing. And again, one of the lessons of this period in history is the incredible influence of lay groups, politically and within the church. And within that, the role of the women. I mean, they really had a silent until now, but influential and decisive role in this whole conflict with a government which was anti-Catholic and anti-religious.
Yep. They always have a important influence, whether that is for good or for ill.
The thing is, if they're Catholic wives and mothers, the influence will probably be for the good. If they're Catholic professional women, then it's a little more dicey, because what's the important thing here? Protecting the home, protecting the future, protecting the children. Okay.
For those of us women who've tried to do both.
Yes.
Okay, it's a little,
Well, but you did it somewhat serially in the sense
that
you
can't, here's just a little basic truism. You can't have everything all at once. As soon as you just can accept that about life, you're a lot happier.
That's right. But when your children were young,
that's right.
You could do some work for us. You did. And I've seen mothers with large families. I can't believe what they do outside the family. But the point is, family was first.
That's right.
Now the kids are grown.
That's right.
And you got more time.
That's right.
And you're healthy.
Praise God for that.
Okay.
More or less. Thank God for that. Had a lot of close calls, but here I am. But back to, I know, Joseph, you wanted to, even last time you started to mention how you felt that the Cristeros were sold out. I would like to hear you
Well, yeah,
develop
so a
that.
couple of things. Obviously, we getting towards the conclusion of the discussion, we get to the epilogue. And first thing I would say, I was pleased to see, as a literature person, some of this intertextual stuff about this real life tyrant called Garrido, that was the inspiration for the character in Graham Greene's The Power and the Glory.
Yes.
So that was very interesting for me. But generally speaking, we have this reprisals, the communist, the Marxist government breaking their promises, and the thing is that the author sort of suggests that because there was a stalemate, somehow a peace had to be brokered. And my view would be, well, there's large parts of Mexico which is basically now liberated from Marxist rule, that the Marxists cannot actually bring under their control. And I think that should have been the wedge from which progress was made against Caius's government, rather than trusting him, which is evidently, clearly a mistake. I know, admittedly, it's easy to say that in hindsight, although Marxists have a track record, even by then. So I would have said, no, what we need to do is to basically support those parts of free Mexico that have managed to secure their freedom from the Marxist government through arms, and to basically use that, if you like, as the bridgehead by which you then expand freedom to the rest of Mexico. That, to me, would have been a better, it's easy to say again with the wisdom of hindsight, but that would have been a better strategy than just trusting that a Marxist government will keep its promises once the arms have been laid down.
Right. And that was one of the saddest things to read in here, was that after they gave up their arms,
Yes.
the government hunted them down and assassinated them. Well,
Yes.
that is that a surprise? But unfortunately, one of the things that was making it difficult to pursue your strategy, Joseph, is that there were still some bishops intent on actually having a church-controlled government or a church overthrow of the government. And so these poor Cristeros were really stuck between a rock and a hard place. They really were, because yeah.
Well, I wondered if we had been around at the time and having a discussion with ourselves, whose side would we have been on? What would we have done? I mean, you had a whole spectrum of views by the bishops, and then a minority, goes to Rome and says, we're all agreed on this, which was deceptive. But then you have to honor the heroism of the Cristeros, and especially the support they got from the ordinary people. On the other hand, you've got people who are good-hearted or good-willed and want to have a diplomatic solution. I don't know.
And that's true of some, but we need to remember also that the diplomatic solution is a euphemism for cowardice. It's also a euphemism for not actually having faith. The church militant is the church at war, and I even as an old man, I would be too old to fight with the Cristeros, but I think that if I were in Mexico at the time, I would certainly be a supporter of them.
I thought it was interesting that on page 254, this Father Burke, had enjoyed the respect of 5 presidents, but FDR admired him most, consulting him regularly on matters of religion. It mystified the bishops of Mexico that a Catholic priest could command such respect in a Protestant nation like the United States, while they were living under conditions of such unprecedented persecution. And I think this being mystified is not just among the bishops of Mexico. I think that including bishops in Europe, bishops inside the Vatican, over generations have been mystified by the phenomenon of the United States of America, in which Catholics have enjoyed toleration since the founding, that a Catholic signed the Declaration of Independence and was there at the Constitutional Convention and so on. I mean, you got to admit, America has been a very unique place in which, even though Catholics have been a minority from the beginning, they've enjoyed toleration. The church has been able to grow and flourish. And these other countries that were supposedly Catholic, here are co-religionists are having one heck of a time at it,
Yes.
Yeah, although I'm not disagreeing with any of that. So I'm putting a period after that statement.
Okay, I want to comment on one thing. Maybe my last comment, except for perhaps a response to another comment. But on the one on page 251, I love this. Stories abounded about fast-talking nuns holding up education spectacles at the door, while their colleagues rushed to turn around the pictures on the walls. Pictures had an image of Our Lady on the front, an image of Benito Juarez on the back.
That's hilarious.
That was great.
That is great. That is great. That's gutsy nuns right there.
Yeah.
And we mentioned in an earlier podcast the nuns who came to San Francisco fleeing the persecution, and the stories that the Mother Superior at the Carmel told me about the sisters, that when these troops came to desecrate their chapel, they were constantly being harried by the government. And finally, these troops came to terrorize them and desecrate their chapel. And the Mother Superior, she ran to the chapel first, grabbed the hosts out of the tabernacle, and she literally was running with them and consuming them and kicking these soldiers and pushing them away. And finally, after the last one, surrendered. And she went to jail. But, some of these, the gutsiness of some of these Catholics is just so, wow.
Well, I like 261 to finish on if we weren't going to finish on a positive note. We had the bad news on page 260. The stability of the government was never threatened, and I would question that. I would question during the Cristero War it was threatened because there were chunks of the country which were not under its control. Once they had complete control of the country again, then yes, it wasn't threatened. And the rebellion did nothing to change the anti-religious provisions of the 1917 Constitution. In fact, in the 1930s, those provisions became even harsher. That's the bad news. But look at the next page. The government could talk peace eventually and admit, on paper at least. But more importantly, this is about a quarter of the way down, page 261. More importantly, the brutality and persecution visited on the people of Mexico only made the faith of the people stronger. And skip a few lines. The faith that is so much admired in Mexican Catholics today can be attributed to the suffering, and I would add the word heroism, of their grandparents and great-grandparents in the 1920s and 1930s. Mm-hmm. So in many ways, the legacy of the Cristeros is the fact that they set an example that that you do have to, with charity, but that might include taking up arms with charity, to defend the faith against those who would destroy it.
And what this doesn't mention in the epilogue is that eventually the dominance of the PRI, that's the revolutionary Marxist leftist Freemason party that dominated Mexican government for so long, its grip finally was broken in the 1990s or so, and they actually had a Catholic president in Mexico after years of Catholics not being even allowed to have any public office at all. I mean, unless they were underground Catholics and no one knew. And so over time, the grip of this thing was loosened. And so you just have to have a long-term view, I guess.
Right, but it did remind me of the fact that one of these, anti-Catholic presidents, or at least that administration, had his sons at Benedictine University in Ashton.
Oh yes, that I noticed that too. It wasn't called Benedictine then, but that is now Benedictine College. Yeah. And oh, it's on page 253. How about that? So, yeah.
We keep on fighting. Well, this is a great book. I mean, I learned a lot. I should have known a lot earlier. But
I would say, Father and Vivian, that although I have been Mr. Irritable during this, largely because of some of Monsignor Murphy's approach, this is an important book. And thanks be to God for Ignatius Press for publishing it. We do need to know more about the Cristero War and the saints and sinners that were involved in it. And this book was crucial. I would like to see more books and perhaps better ones, but this is a book that needed publishing, and thanks be to God and to Ignatius Press that it came to pass.
Amen. And next week we will begin our discussion of the music of Christendom by Susan Treacy, who I knew at Ave University. So we will be prepared to discuss the first 7 chapters, and we'll see you next week on Formed Book Club.
If you enjoyed this discussion, please help spread the word about the Formed Book Club by subscribing to the podcast and writing a review. You can sign up for weekly updates at formedbookclub.ignatius.com.